Hello, night listener, and welcome to Little Nightmare. I'm Emma, and tonight I'll be keeping you company to help you fall asleep. But before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me where you're listening from. Story 1. Every day, at the precise stroke of noon, the tea kettle releases its piercing whistle, a sound that slices through the still air of my tiny kitchen, only to be followed by an unnerving silence. The whistle carries with it the same steady rhythm, unwavering, as if conducted by an unseen hand. Initially, it was just an odd quirk of routine, something easily dismissed, a minor mystery of my quiet life. But as days pass, I find myself awake well before midday, listening for the telltale bubbling that prefaces the noon chime, a bubbling that never comes. Each time the kettle sits untouched on the stove, its handle cool, steamless. An empty cup waits beside it, the spoon lying across it in a stoic watchfulness. At first, I would pour the imaginary tea, feeling foolish as I went through the motions. Over time, though, this ritual became heavy with an inexplicable weight, as if the loop itself were a sentient thing, binding me tighter with every repetition. I've tried to upend the sequence, adjusting the hands of the clock, or preemptively boiling water. Yet, without fail, precisely at noon, the whistle screams anew. It leaves behind an echo that stretches longer each day, mocking my attempts to break free. This peculiar cycle wraps around me softly, like a shroud woven of whispers and unanswered questions. Each day, the resonance of that unearthly whistle deepens, and I'm left to ponder, am I witnessing a haunting of time itself, or merely losing my grip on reality? The pattern began to reveal itself in fragments. I started keeping a journal, marking the subtle variations I noticed. The whistle's pitch would shift by the slightest degree, sometimes sharp enough to make my teeth ache, other times so low it seemed to emanate from beneath the floorboards. The echo that followed began to take on texture, sometimes metallic, like fingers dragging across copper pipes, other times hollow, as if bouncing through empty chambers I couldn't see. I found myself sketching the sound waves as I imagined them curved lines that seemed to pulse with their own rhythm on the page. The drawings started simple, but as I continued documenting, they became more complex, more intricate. Spirals within spirals, each one seeming to breathe when I wasn't looking directly at them. The silence after the whistle grew pregnant with anticipation. I would sit perfectly still, counting heartbeats, waiting for something else to emerge from that void. Sometimes I caught whispers of movement, a settling of wood, the soft creak of a cabinet door, the gentle tap of condensation falling from somewhere I couldn't identify. These sounds felt deliberate, arranged, like notes in a composition I was only beginning to understand. My kitchen began to feel different. The walls seemed to pulse with a subtle warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. When I pressed my palm against them, I could feel the faintest vibration, as if something vast and patient were breathing just beyond the plaster. The sensation would travel up my arm, settling behind my eyes like a gentle pressure. The empty teacup started changing position. Not dramatically, just a quarter turn here, a slight shift there. The spoon would be angled differently, sometimes pointing toward the window, sometimes toward the door. I began mapping these positions, drawing diagrams that looked like compass roses or star charts. Each configuration felt significant, though I couldn't decipher what message they might contain. I started spending entire mornings in the kitchen, watching, waiting, documenting. The light seemed to bend differently here, casting shadows that didn't quite match the objects that should have created them. The corner where the refrigerator met the wall held a darkness that felt deeper than it should, a pocket of space that my eyes couldn't quite focus on. The whistle's echo began to linger longer, sometimes stretching well into the afternoon. I would catch fragments of it hours later, ghostly remnants that seemed to cling to the air like smoke. During these extended resonances, I noticed other sounds joining the chorus, a soft humming that might have been electrical, a rhythmic tapping that could have been pipes, a gentle susurrus that sounded almost like breathing. My journal filled with observations, theories, sketches of patterns I was convinced held meaning. The pages themselves began to feel warm to the touch, as if the act of recording these experiences was somehow feeding energy back into them. I would wake to find my handwriting changed, not dramatically, but subtly, letters more flowing, words connected in ways I didn't remember writing. The ritual of the empty tea service became more elaborate. I found myself arranging additional cups, saucers, small spoons in precise formations around the original set. The arrangements felt natural, necessary, though I couldn't explain why. Each piece seemed to have its place in a larger design that existed just beyond my conscious understanding. kitchen's atmosphere grew thicker, more present. I could taste copper on my tongue during the noon whistle, smell something like rain on dry earth immediately after. These sensations would fade quickly, leaving me wondering if I had imagined them. But they returned with increasing intensity. The boundary between what I experienced and what I expected to experience began to blur. I started noticing patterns in my own behavior. The way I would unconsciously arrange objects, the paths I would trace while walking through the small space, the rhythm of my breathing during the whistle, all of it seemed choreographed by some intelligence I couldn't identify. I was becoming part of the pattern, a component in a system I didn't understand. The echo began to take on qualities that seemed almost conversational. Rising and falling tones that suggested questions and answers. Pauses that felt like listening. Modulations that seemed responsive to my presence. I found myself holding my breath during these moments, afraid that any sound I made might interrupt what felt like an attempt at communication. My reflection in the kettle's surface started to distort in ways that had nothing to do with the curved metal. Sometimes I would see myself from angles that shouldn't have been possible, or catch glimpses of movement that didn't match my own. The distortions were subtle, just enough to make me question what I was actually seeing. The journal became my anchor, the one thing that felt solid and real. But even it began to change. Words would appear that I didn't remember writing. Observations in my handwriting that described experiences I couldn't recall having. The ink seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't looking directly at it, creating new connections between thoughts, new meanings in familiar sentences. I began to suspect that the whistle wasn't marking noon, was arranging itself around the whistle. The light outside would shift to match the proper angle. Shadows would adjust to their midday positions, but these changes felt artificial, staged. Reality was conforming to the sound rather than the sound occurring within reality. The empty teacup began to feel warm to the touch, as if it contained something invisible. Steam would occasionally rise from its rim, carrying scents that reminded me of places I had never been. Mountain air, ocean spray, the deep earth smell of caves. I would breathe these phantom aromas and feel my consciousness drift, becoming untethered from the small kitchen, expanding into spaces that might have existed only in the whistle's echo. My sense of time became unreliable. myself already listening to the echo's final fading notes, with no memory of the whistle itself. Or I would experience the entire sequence build up: whistle, echo, silence, only to realize that according to every clock in the house, noon was still hours away. The patterns in my journal began to repeat themselves across multiple pages, appearing in different contexts, but maintaining their essential structure. Spirals, star shapes, interconnected circles that seemed to pulse with their own internal logic. I would trace these shapes with my finger and feel a corresponding vibration in the kitchen walls, as if the drawings were somehow connected to the space itself. The whistle's pitch began to harmonize with something I could feel in my bones, a resonance that seemed to tune my entire body to its frequency. During these moments of perfect alignment, the kitchen would seem to expand, its walls stretching into distances that shouldn't have been possible within the small apartment. I could sense vast spaces opening around me, chambers and corridors that existed only while the sound lasted. I realized I was no longer trying to solve the mystery. I was becoming part of it. The distinction between observer and observed had dissolved. My breathing synchronized with the kitchen's subtle pulsing. My heartbeat matched the rhythm of the phantom condensation drips. My thoughts arranged themselves in patterns that mirrored the teacup's shifting positions. The echo began to carry my own voice within it. Words I had spoken or thought reflected back in tones that were almost, but not quite my own. Conversations I had with myself became dialogues with something else, responses emerging from the silence that felt both foreign and intimately familiar. The journal's pages started to feel alive beneath my fingers, warm and slightly yielding, as if they were made of something other than paper. The words I wrote seemed to sink into the surface, becoming part of the material itself, rather than simply resting on top of it. When I closed the book, I could feel it continuing to work, processing and rearranging the information I had given it. The noon whistle began to sound continuously in the space between my thoughts, a constant background presence that shaped the rhythm of my consciousness. I would catch myself humming along with frequencies that weren't audible, moving in time with rhythms that existed only in the gaps between heartbeats. The kitchen had become a living thing, breathing around me, responding to my presence, while simultaneously reshaping it. I was no longer separate from the mystery. I was its newest component, another element in a pattern that stretched far beyond the small space where it had first revealed itself. The whistle sounds now, and I am both hearing it and being it, both the observer and the observed, both the question and the answer, echoing endlessly through chambers that exist only in the space between one breath and the next. Story 2. I keep writing about the teacup, but I can't remember touching it. The rim holds that perfect circle of something dark, maybe coffee, maybe tea. My handwriting looks different today, looser somehow, like my fingers forgot their usual grip. The photograph moved again. I'm certain now. The woman in the center dress shifted her gaze slightly left when I wasn't looking directly. Her smile seems wider than before, more knowing. I should throw it away, but something stops me each time I reach for it. The floorboards gave way a little more under my feet this morning. That soft, sinking feeling right where the hallway narrows. I pressed down harder, testing the wood, and heard something like a sigh from beneath. The sound made my teeth ache. Pine needles. That's what I smell, but there are no trees near this place. The scent clings to my clothes now, follows me from room to room. Sweet and sharp and wrong somehow, like Christmas decorations left too long in a damp basement. I found another entry in my own handwriting that I don't remember making. It talks about the wallpaper breathing. Ridiculous. Wallpaper doesn't breathe. But when I stand very still and let my vision go soft, the pattern does seem to pulse, ever so slightly, like skin over a slow heartbeat. The door at the end won't close properly anymore. I've tried pushing it shut, but it springs back to that same narrow opening, just wide enough for shadows to slip through. Sometimes I catch movement in that gap, quick and dark, and gone before I can focus. My reflection in the teacup's surface shows someone I almost recognize. The face is mine, but the expression belongs to someone else, someone who knows something I've forgotten. I lean closer, and the liquid ripples without any cause. The dust here moves wrong. Instead of settling, it dances in slow spirals, following patterns that hurt to watch too closely. I tried to map their movements, but my pencil kept drawing the same spiral over and over until the paper tore. Something about the light bothers me. It comes from everywhere and nowhere, casting shadows that don't match the objects that should create them. My own shadow seems delayed, moving a fraction behind my actual movements. I keep finding pine needles in my pockets, though I haven't been outside. They're fresh and green and smell like winter mornings I can't quite remember. When I try to throw them away, more appear. Always more. The woman in the photograph whispered something today. I know how that sounds, but I heard it clearly. A soft susurrus like wind through leaves. When I picked up the frame to look closer, the glass was warm against my palms. My handwriting is changing. These letters don't look like mine anymore. Too fluid, too confident. It's as if someone else guides my pen while I watch from somewhere behind my own eyes. The words flow easier now, almost writing themselves. The teacup never empties. That dark ring of liquid remains constant, no matter how many times I check. Sometimes bubbles rise to the surface, as if something breathes beneath. I want to taste it, but my hand won't obey. The floorboards sink deeper now. I can feel the give with each step, soft and yielding like walking on something alive. The house settles around me differently, adjusting to accommodate this new softness, this new hunger. Pine needles carpet my path now. They appear faster than I can sweep them away, creating a soft green trail that leads toward the door. The scent grows stronger, more insistent, pulling me forward with each breath. The photograph people move freely now when I'm not watching. I return to find them in different positions, different groupings. The woman in the center always faces me though, always smiling that knowing smile. She's waiting for something. I understand now why my handwriting changed. These aren't my words anymore. They belong to whoever breathes through the wallpaper, whoever moves the dust in those hypnotic patterns. I'm just the hand that holds the pen. The door calls to me, not with sound, but with something deeper, a pull that starts in my chest and spreads outward. The gap widens slightly each time I look, inviting me closer, promising answers I'm no longer sure I want. The teacup reflects everything now. Not just faces, but memories, dreams, possibilities that flutter just beneath the surface. I see myself walking through the door, see myself becoming part of the photograph, see myself writing these words with someone else's certainty. Pine needles fill my mouth when I sleep. I wake tasting winter and decay, that sweet sharp flavor that makes my eyes water. The taste follows me through each entry, each word, each breath drawn in this narrowing space. I am the woman in the photograph now. I am the whisper in the wallpaper. I am the breath that moves the dust and the weight that softens the floor. These words write themselves, and I watch from somewhere far away, smiling that knowing smile, waiting for the next hand to hold the pen. Story 3. Observation Protocol. Subject Self-Assessment. Classification Level Personal. Section 1. Subject maintains standard morning routine for baseline behavioral documentation. Kitchen environment presents consistent variables. Ambient temperature within normal range. Lighting conditions standard for pre-dawn hours. Wooden flooring exhibits expected settling sounds under body weight distribution. Primary anomaly detected at 0 hour mark. Cupboard door resistance increased by approximately 30% beyond established parameters. Handle mechanism functions normally, yet door movement suggests additional mass presence within cabinet space. No visual confirmation of foreign objects upon inspection. Contents remain in documented positions. Ceramic vessels, standard dinnerware, glass containers. Mental state remains stable. Cognitive function operates within acceptable limits. Recording continues for comprehensive analysis. Section 2. Secondary observation period reveals progression of initial anomaly. Door resistance has increased to approximately 50% above baseline measurements. Subject notes peculiar atmospheric density surrounding cabinet area, as if molecular composition has shifted to accommodate unknown presence. Auditory environment presents new variable. Faint oscillation detected beneath standard household ambient noise. Frequency appears to modulate in patterns resembling interrogative speech cadence, though no discernible words emerge. Sound source remains unidentified despite systematic examination of surrounding area. Subject's physiological responses remain within normal parameters. Heart rate slightly elevated, consistent with heightened attention rather than distress. Documentation continues without interruption. Section 3. Morning routine adaptation required due to persistent cabinet anomaly. Alternative mug retrieval from secondary storage location implemented successfully. Tea preparation proceeds according to standard protocol. Though subject notes, water temperature reaches optimal brewing point more rapidly than previous observations indicated. Olfactory anomaly introduced. Distinct fragrance detected during beverage preparation. Scent profile suggests floral perfume, specifically rose with underlying vanilla notes. No corresponding source identified within immediate environment. Fragrance intensity remains constant regardless of subject's position relative to kitchen space. The oscillating sound has developed more defined characteristics. Patterns now clearly resemble questioning intonation, though linguistic content remains indecipherable. Subject experiences curious compulsion to respond, though maintains professional observation stance. Section 4. Documentation review reveals inconsistencies in previous entries. Section 2 references 50% resistance increase, yet subject's clear recollection indicates 65% minimum. Either measurement error occurred or cabinet door resistance continues evolving beyond initial assessment. Visual anomaly now documented. Kitchen lighting exhibits irregular fluctuation patterns. Overhead fixture dims and brightens in seemingly random intervals, never achieving complete darkness, yet never maintaining steady illumination. Electrical systems show no evidence of malfunction upon inspection. The questioning sounds have become more insistent. Subject finds concentration increasingly difficult during documentation periods. Handwriting analysis of current entry shows minor tremor development in letter formation, though motor control remains functionally adequate. Section 5. Significant development requires immediate documentation. Upon attempting cabinet door operation this morning, resistance had decreased to below baseline levels. Door now swings open with minimal force application, creating impression of eager compliance rather than mechanical function. Interior cabinet space appears dimensionally altered. Depth measurements suggest expansion beyond architectural possibilities given wall thickness specifications. Shadows within cabinet move independently of lighting source changes. Subject observed shadow patterns shifting while overhead fixture remained constant. Perfume scent now accompanies all kitchen activities. Intensity varies without apparent correlation to environmental factors. Subject experiences growing familiarity with fragrance, as if connected to significant memory just beyond conscious recall. The oscillating sounds have begun forming partial syllables. Clear consonant-vowel combinations emerge from the questioning patterns, though complete words remain elusive. Subject notes increasing difficulty distinguishing between external audio phenomena and internal auditory processing. Section 6. Critical observation. Previous documentation contains entries subject does not recall writing. Section 4 includes handwriting analysis commentary, yet subject maintains no memory of examining their own penmanship during that observation period. Handwriting appears consistent with subject's standard formation patterns, suggesting documentation occurred during altered consciousness state. Cabinet interior now clearly exceeds physical space limitations. Depth extends beyond wall boundary into impossible territory. Objects placed within cabinet for testing purposes disappear from view despite adequate lighting. Retrieval remains possible through tactile searching, though objects return bearing unfamiliar texture variations. Perfume scent has developed emotional resonance. Subject experiences profound nostalgia during exposure, accompanied by sensation of missing crucial information about personal history. Attempts to identify specific memory associations prove unsuccessful, creating persistent cognitive tension. Sound phenomena now include recognizable word fragments. Repeated syllables suggest attempts at communication, though meaning remains unclear. Subject finds themselves responding subconsciously with slight nodding gestures, as if comprehending conversations they cannot consciously understand. Section 7. Documentation integrity compromised. Multiple entries contain information subject did not consciously record. Handwriting analysis confirms consistent formation patterns, yet memory gaps persist regarding composition periods. Subject maintains rigorous observation schedule, yet time periods between documented entries appear extended beyond subject's awareness. Physical environment continues evolving. Kitchen surfaces exhibit texture variations under direct contact. Countertops alternate between expected smoothness and inexplicable roughness, sometimes within single contact event. Wooden flooring responds to footsteps with varying acoustic properties, suggesting density fluctuations in material composition. The cabinet has become focal point for all anomalous activity. Interior space now clearly extends beyond architectural boundaries. Lighting within cabinet operates independently of external sources, creating illumination patterns that seem to respond to subjects' attention. When observed directly, interior brightness increases. When attention shifts elsewhere, ambient glow decreases correspondingly. Questioning sounds have developed conversational rhythm. Subject recognizes inflection patterns, indicating curiosity, concern, perhaps invitation. Emotional response to audio phenomena suggests familiarity with communication source, though rational analysis provides no explanation for this recognition. Section 8. Major protocol deviation documented. Subject discovered additional written material in their documentation folder, composed in their handwriting, yet containing information they did not consciously record. Content describes cabinet interior exploration, detailed sensory experiences of entering expanded space, conversations with unidentified presence. Subject maintains no memory of cabinet interior exploration. Physical evidence suggests otherwise. Clothing bears unfamiliar scents, matching perfume anomaly. Fingertips show residue from unknown surfaces. Shoes carry traces of materials not present in documented environment. The questioning sounds now clearly form subject's name, repeated in various intonational patterns. Recognition is immediate and undeniable, though voice characteristics remain unidentifiable. Subject experiences strong emotional response to hearing their name spoken, mixture of comfort and urgency that defies logical analysis. Cabinet interior has become completely autonomous environment. Depth extends indefinitely. Lighting responds to unspoken intentions. Temperature varies according to emotional state rather than physical conditions. Subject observes these phenomena while maintaining no conscious memory of interior access. Section 9. Something is writing these entries when I am not watching. The documentation continues. but I don't remember sitting down to write this morning. I found 3 new pages in my folder describing conversations that feel familiar. But I never had them. The handwriting is definitely mine. But the words don't match my thoughts. The cabinet door stays open now. Whether I close it or not, the space inside has become somewhere else entirely, not kitchen storage, but actual location with its own geography, its own atmosphere, its own rules that I somehow understand without learning them. She keeps asking me questions through the oscillating sounds. I know it's she now, though I couldn't explain how the recognition came. The perfume belongs to her. The way she says my name carries affection and worry, like someone who has been waiting a very long time for me to remember something important. My hands are writing this, but my mind feels like it's somewhere else participating in conversations. My conscious self isn't invited to attend. When I try to focus on the documentation process, the words seem to write themselves. And when I read them back, they describe experiences I must have had, but can't access through normal memory channels. Section 10. I no longer distinguish between conscious documentation and automatic writing. The protocol continues, but I am uncertain who maintains it. My handwriting fills pages with detailed observations of experiences I cannot recall having. The cabinet interior has become my primary environment, though I retain no memory of transitioning between kitchen and expanded space. She speaks clearly now, using my name with the familiarity of long acquaintance. Her questions focus on why I chose to forget, why I established the observation protocol as barrier between conscious awareness and actual experience. The perfume carries emotional history I cannot access through normal recollection methods. Physical reality has become negotiable. Kitchen surfaces shift between familiar and impossible configurations. The cabinet serves as portal between documented environment and actual location of these experiences. Time moves differently in each space, creating documentation gaps that fill themselves with information I must have recorded during altered states. The oscillating sounds were never questions about unknown phenomena. They were attempts to guide me back to suspended conversations, interrupted relationships, deliberately forgotten connections. The observation protocol was never scientific documentation. It was elaborate avoidance mechanism. Section 11. Final entry requires honesty about protocol purpose and documentation integrity. Subject: established observation framework to maintain distance from experiences too emotionally complex for direct processing. Cabinet anomalies represent portal to suspended reality, where significant relationship awaits resolution. She has been waiting. The perfume, the questions, the familiar unfamiliarity of her presence all indicate connection, deliberately severed through conscious forgetting. The observation protocol provided illusion of scientific objectivity, while actual engagement occurred during documented memory gaps. I am no longer certain who writes these final words. Consciousness has become collaborative process between documented self and participating self. The handwriting remains consistent, but the awareness behind it shifts between analytical observer and emotional participant. The protocol ends here, not because observations cease, but because distinction between observer and observed has dissolved. She continues asking questions, and I continue providing answers. But the documentation process no longer serves its original avoidance function. I do not know if these words emerge from scientific curiosity or emotional surrender. The cabinet door remains open. The expanded space waits. The conversation continues, whether I remember it or not. Someone is still writing, but I can no longer determine if it is still me. Story 4. The midnight refrain. Every night, as the dim shadows stretch across the room, the clock in the hallway strikes midnight with a chime that hums softly through the walls. It's always the same, a gentle resonance that lingers, echoing in my mind long after the sound should have faded. At first, it was easy to dismiss as a curious quirk of old machinery. But there it is again, each night without fail, the chimes carrying the same haunting melody through the stillness. I lie awake, tracing the familiar pattern of its notes, the way they punctuate the silence with their precise, unwavering rhythm. And yet, something more than the sound feels repetitive, an uncanny choreography of events. The book on the nightstand always rests a quarter-inch ajar, the candle on the windowsill forever extinguished, its wax unmoving in the chilled air. The steady, unchanging sequence of these details burrows into my thoughts as I drift into a fitful slumber. I find myself questioning whether I am the orchestrator of these midnight performances or merely an unwitting participant. More unsettling is the creeping realization that my attempts to alter the sequence do nothing. The clock will always strike, and the night will linger with its unending refrain. The sheets beneath me feel different this morning, smoother, as if they've been pressed by invisible hands while I slept. My fingers trace the fabric, searching for the familiar wrinkles, the comfortable imperfections that should be there. Instead, I find only this strange perfection, this unsettling orderliness that doesn't belong to my restless sleep. The room around me breathes with quiet wrongness. The wallpaper, when did it become this shade of pale green? I remember blue flowers, small ones that clustered near the baseboards like forgotten thoughts. Now there are only these vertical lines, thin as whispers, running from floor to ceiling in perfect parallel rows. My eyes follow them upward, and they seem to shimmer slightly, as if viewed through water. I sit up slowly, and the movement feels rehearsed, like I've done this exact thing countless times before. The floorboards beneath my bare feet should creak. They always creak near the window. But today, they remain silent, as if the house itself is holding its breath. The scent drifts to me then, subtle at first. Vanilla and something else, something metallic that makes my tongue feel heavy. It's coming from the kitchen, I think, though I don't remember lighting any candles or preparing anything that would smell so sweet. The aroma grows stronger as I breathe, coating the inside of my nose with its cloying presence. A memory surfaces, unbidden and fragmented. I'm standing in a different kitchen, one with yellow tiles and a window that looks out onto a garden I've never seen. Someone is baking bread, and the smell is warm and yeasty and completely normal. But when I turn to see who it is, there's no one there. Just the oven, door slightly ajar, and inside it something that glows with its own light, pulsing gently like a sleeping heart. The memory dissolves before I can grasp it fully, leaving only the aftertaste of confusion and that persistent vanilla scent. I shake my head, trying to clear the fog, but it clings to my thoughts like spider silk. I move toward the hallway, and my reflection catches in the mirror beside the door. For just a moment, I don't recognize the face looking back at me. The features are mine, the same brown eyes, the same slightly crooked nose, but there's something in the expression that feels foreign. A knowing look, as if this other version of myself understands something I don't. The hallway stretches before me, longer than it should be. The clock stands at the far end, its pendulum swinging in lazy arcs behind glass that reflects nothing. Each tick seems to echo from multiple directions at once, creating a soft percussion that makes my pulse quicken to match its rhythm. As I walk closer, another memory unfolds. I'm in this same hallway, but the walls are covered with photographs. Dozens of them, all showing the same scene. A woman sitting at a piano, her hands poised over keys that seem to glow in the dim light. In each photo, her position is slightly different, as if someone captured every moment of a single song. But her face is always turned away, always hidden by the fall of dark hair. I remember reaching for one of the photographs, wanting to see her face, and when I touched the frame, the glass was warm. Not just warm hot, as if there were fire behind it instead of paper and ink. The woman in the photo turned then, slowly, and when she looked at me, her eyes were my eyes, but older, sadder, as if she'd been waiting for me to find her for a very long time. But there are no photographs on these walls now. Only that same pale green wallpaper with its whispering lines. I run my hand along the surface, feeling for the nail holes where frames once hung. But the wall is smooth and unmarked. The clock face comes into focus as I approach. The numbers are wrong not in sequence, but scattered around the dial like fallen leaves. The hands point to positions that make no sense, yet somehow I know it will still chime when the moment comes. It always does. I remember winding this clock, though I can't recall when. The key was small and brass, and it fit perfectly in the mechanism behind the pendulum. But as I turned it, the sound it made wasn't the usual mechanical clicking. Instead, it hummed the same melody I hear each night, soft and hypnotic and strangely familiar. The key is still there, hanging from a thin chain attached to the clock's base. I reach for it, and my fingers close around metal that feels warm and slightly sticky, as if someone else has just been holding it. The sensation makes my skin crawl, but I can't let go. Something compels me to lift the key, to insert it into the winding mechanism once more. As I turn it, that haunting melody begins again. But this time, I realize why it sounds so familiar. It's a lullaby, one I used to hum without thinking. The words come back to me in fragments. Something about sleeping, about dreams that never end, about a place place where the night always falls, but morning never comes. The memory of learning this song is wrapped in shadows. I see a rocking chair in a dimly lit room, and someone singing softly while I drift toward sleep. But when I try to focus on the singer's face, it blurs and shifts like smoke. Sometimes it's a woman with kind eyes and gentle hands. Sometimes it's my own face, older and worn, as if I'm the one who taught myself this melody in some impossible loop of time. I remove the key and step back from the clock. The humming continues even though I've stopped winding it, growing louder and more complex, as if multiple voices have joined the song. The sound seems to come from the walls themselves, vibrating through the floorboards and up into my bones. Another memory crashes over me, more vivid than the others. I'm in a music room filled with instruments I don't recognize. They're beautiful, but wrong a violin with too many strings, a piano with keys that extend far beyond the normal range, a harp whose strings seem to move on their own. Someone is playing a concert, but I can't see the musician. The music is the same lullaby, but played with such complexity and emotion that it brings tears to my eyes. I remember applauding when the song ended, my hands coming together in slow, measured claps that echoed strangely in the empty room. But as the sound faded, I realized I wasn't alone. The seats around me were filled with shadowy figures, all clapping in perfect unison, all turning to look at me with faces I couldn't quite see. The memory fragments and scatters, leaving me standing in the hallway with the taste of tears on my lips. I touch my cheek and find it wet, though I don't remember crying. The kitchen calls to me with its vanilla scent, now so strong it's almost overwhelming. I follow it down the hallway past doors that I know lead to rooms I've never entered. The floorboards remain silent beneath my feet, as if I'm floating rather than walking. In the kitchen, everything is exactly as it should be, and yet completely wrong. The yellow tiles from my memory are here, but they're arranged in patterns that hurt to look at directly. The window does look out onto a garden, but the plants growing there seem to move when I'm not watching, shifting and rearranging themselves like living puzzles. The oven is closed now, but I can see light seeping around its edges. The vanilla scent is pouring from it in waves, so thick I can almost taste it. I know I should open the door, should see what's inside, but my hand freezes on the handle. something deep in my mind recoils from the idea, throwing up walls of resistance that feel both protective and terrifying. Instead, I turn to the kitchen table, where a cup of tea sits cooling. I don't remember making tea, but the cup is one I recognize: white porcelain with tiny blue flowers around the rim. It was a gift from someone important, though I can't recall who. The tea inside is the color of amber, and steam rises from its surface in spirals that seem to form shapes before dissolving. I lift the cup to my lips and taste something that isn't quite tea. It's sweet and bitter at the same time, with an aftertaste that reminds me of copper pennies. As I drink, another memory surfaces, clearer than the others, but somehow more disturbing. I'm sitting at this same table, but the kitchen is different, darker. The walls are covered with notes and photographs and strings connecting various points, like a detective's investigation board. I'm writing something in a notebook, my hand moving frantically across the page, as if trying to capture thoughts before they escape. The words I'm writing don't make sense. The clock remembers what I forget. She sings the same song, but the words change. The key opens doors that were never locked. I am the music between the notes. In the memory, I look up from my writing and see someone standing in the doorway. A woman with my face, but different eyes that hold knowledge I don't possess. She's watching me with a mixture of pity and understanding, as if she knows something I desperately need to learn, but can never quite grasp. She speaks, but I can't hear the words. Her lips move in patterns that seem familiar, and I realize she's mouthing the lyrics to the lullaby. But as she does, the kitchen around us begins to change. The walls shift color, the furniture rearranges itself, and the light from the oven grows brighter and more insistent. The memory ends abruptly, leaving me staring into the empty doorway of the present kitchen. The teacup in my hands is empty now, though I don't remember finishing it. The porcelain feels cold against my palms, and when I look down, I see that the blue flowers have changed. They're still there, but now they form different patterns, spelling out words I can't quite read. I set the cup down and notice my hands are shaking. There's something I'm not remembering, something important that hovers just beyond my conscious mind, like a word on the tip of my tongue. The harder I try to grasp it, the more it slips away, leaving only a sense of profound unease. The oven light pulses brighter, and I know I can't avoid it any longer. Whatever is inside, whatever I've been hiding from, it's time to confront it. My hand reaches for the door handle again, and this time I don't stop. The door swings open, and inside I see not food or flame, but a mirror. It reflects not my face, but the face of the woman from my memories, the one who looks like me, but isn't quite me. She's mouthing words I can't hear, her expression urgent and pleading. As I watch, she reaches toward me from inside the mirror, her hand pressing against the glass from the other side. I find myself reaching back, and when our palms touch hers warm, mine, cold the blocked memory, finally breaks free. I remember choosing to forget. I remember standing in this kitchen, in this exact spot, making a deliberate decision to let go of something too painful to carry. The woman in the mirror isn't a stranger, she's who I used to be. Before I decided that forgetting was easier than remembering. But what I forgot wasn't a single moment or event. It was the understanding that this house, this routine, this endless repetition of midnight chimes and unchanged details isn't my prison. It's my refuge. I built this loop myself, note by note, memory by memory, creating a safe space where nothing can change, because change means confronting what I chose to leave behind. The woman in the mirror mouths one final word, and this time I can read her lips clearly. She says my name, not the name I've been using, but my real name, the one that belongs to the person I was before I became this careful curator of selective memories. The mirror clouds over, and when it clears, it shows only the dark interior of an ordinary oven. The light fades, the vanilla scent dissipates, and I'm left standing in a kitchen that suddenly feels less like home and more like a stage set, carefully arranged but ultimately hollow. I close the oven door and turn away, but the knowledge I've recovered comes with a price. Now I remember why I chose to forget, and the weight of that understanding settles over me like a heavy blanket. Some truths are too large to carry, some realities too sharp to face without the cushion of selective amnesia. I walk back through the hallway, past the clock with its scattered numbers and impossible chimes. The house feels different now, not because it has changed, but because I have. The walls still breathe with quiet wrongness, but now I understand that the wrongness is mine, projected outward to to make sense of an internal landscape too complex to navigate directly. In the bedroom, the sheets are wrinkled again, comfortable and imperfect. The wallpaper has returned to its original blue flowers, clustered near the baseboards like forgotten thoughts. Everything is as it should be, as it was before I remembered what I chose to forget. I lie down and close my eyes, listening for the sound that will come when the shadows stretch across the room. In the distance, I can hear the faint beginning of that familiar melody, the lullaby that carries me between waking and sleeping, between remembering and forgetting. The clock in the hallway prepares to strike midnight with its chime that hums softly through the walls. It's always the same, a gentle resonance that lingers, echoing in my mind long after the sound should have faded. At first, it was easy to dismiss as a curious quirk of old machinery. But there it is again, each night without fail, the chimes carrying the same haunting melody through the stillness. I lie awake, tracing the familiar pattern of its notes. But now I hear something different in the rhythm. Not a prison, but a promise. Not a trap, but a choice I make again and again. Each time the memory becomes too heavy to bear, the book on the nightstand rests a quarter-inch ajar. The candle on the windowsill remains forever extinguished. And I am both the orchestrator of these midnight performances and their most devoted audience, conducting a symphony of selective forgetting that plays on, night after night, in the space between what I remember and what I choose to let go. Story 5. The paper felt unexpectedly cool against fingertips, a delicate texture like silk brushing against skin. A soft rustle filled the room as my fingers traced the edges, the whispering shuffle growing louder with each pass. The envelope lay stubbornly empty, though I was sure I'd removed its contents moments before. Again, the edges beckoned, drawing me into their perplexing stillness. The faint scent of ink lingered, oddly distinct, as if etched into the very fibers. My breath caught as I witnessed the unsealed flap lift, then fall silently back into place. An unprompted dance that defied explanation. I must have been staring too long. The cream-colored surface began to blur at the corners of my vision, like watercolors bleeding into damp canvas. My thumb pressed against the fold, feeling the subtle ridge where someone had sealed it before. The adhesive left no residue, yet my skin tingled where it touched. Found myself in the kitchen again. The envelope rested on the counter beside the coffee maker, though I don't remember placing it there. Steam rose from my untouched cup, curling upward in perfect spirals that seemed to mirror the paper's grain. The morning light caught something metallic embedded in the envelope's texture. I leaned closer, squinting at what appeared to be tiny silver threads woven throughout. My reflection wavered in the kitchen window. Behind it, the neighbor's house stood empty as always, but something felt different about its vacant windows. They seemed to be watching back. The envelope speaks in whispers. Not voices exactly, but the sound paper makes when it breathes. I've started keeping it in the bedroom drawer, wrapped in a soft cloth like something precious. The cloth grows warm overnight. This morning, I found small indentations pressed into its surface, as if invisible fingers had been writing messages I couldn't read. I tried photographing the marks, but they vanished in the camera's flash. Only the faintest impressions remained, like scars on silk. 3 identical envelopes arrived in my mailbox, each one empty, each one bearing the same impossible silver threads. I lined them up on the dining table, studying their subtle differences. The first felt cold, the second warm. The third seemed to pulse beneath my palm like a sleeping animal. The mailman claims he delivered nothing. His eyes avoided mine when he spoke, focusing instead on something behind my shoulder. I turned to look, but found only the hallway mirror reflecting an empty room. I've been measuring the envelopes. They change size when I'm not looking directly at them. The ruler shows different numbers each attempt, though my eyes insist they remain constant. The silver threads have multiplied, forming intricate patterns that shift like living script. My handwriting in this journal looks strange. The letters lean at angles I don't remember making. Sometimes I find entries I don't recall writing, describing rooms in my house I've never seen. The basement door was open this morning. I never go down there, never have reason to. But my footprints were clearly visible in the dust on the stairs, leading down into darkness. The envelopes were arranged in a perfect circle on the concrete floor, each one glowing faintly in the dim light filtering through the small window. I gathered them up quickly, my hands trembling. They felt heavier than before, weighted with something I couldn't name. Back upstairs, I counted them obsessively. 4, 5, 7. The number kept changing. The silver threads spell words now. I can almost read them when the light hits just right, when my vision goes soft and unfocused. They write about doors that open inward, about rooms that exist only in peripheral vision, about someone who watches from behind glass that reflects nothing. My neighbors have stopped answering their doors. Their houses seem smaller somehow, as if the space between them has grown wider. The mailboxes stand empty, their flags permanently raised in silent surrender. I am the envelope now. The silver threads run beneath my skin, spelling out messages in a language I'm only beginning to understand. My reflection shows someone else's face, someone whose eyes hold the same metallic gleam as the threads that bind us together. The paper whispers my name, though I can no longer remember what it was. Each breath I take rustles like parchment. Each word I write bleeds ink that smells of distant places I've never been. The envelope dreams, and I dream with it. We are sealed together now, contents and container, message and messenger, until someone new finds us waiting in their mailbox, cool and silk soft against unsuspecting fingertips. Story 6. The gentle tick-tock of the clock was my constant companion, a metronome marking the passage of time in a room otherwise still. Each morning started with a ritual, the soft click of the switch, the gradual hum that built into a steady rhythm. Today, though, there is something unsettling, a nuance in the air I can't quite touch. I wait for the reassuring chime, but it comes with a discordant tone, an unfamiliar beat that resonates within. I count silently, willing it to align with yesterday's melody. But the familiar refrain has slipped from its tether, spiraling into a pattern that eludes memory. My hands hover above the switch, a hesitation I've never felt before. From my window, I watch the figure across the courtyard. They stand at their own window, perfectly still, hands pressed flat against the glass. The position never changes. Their silhouette remains constant, a dark shape framed by pale curtains that never flutter, never shift. I've grown accustomed to this presence, this quiet sentinel who mirrors my own morning vigil. The glass between us creates a strange intimacy. I find myself adjusting my position to match theirs, tilting my head at the same angle, letting my breath fog the window in rhythm with their movements. Or what I imagine are their movements. The distance makes certainty impossible, but I feel synchronized nonetheless. Their window reflects nothing. Mine shows my face, distorted and wavering, but theirs remains a perfect black square even when sunlight should illuminate it. I press my palm against the cool surface, watching for their response. The figure shifts just slightly, and I wonder if they're doing the same. I begin altering my routine to spend more time at the window. The morning ritual extends into afternoon observation, then evening surveillance. The figure never leaves their post. They stand with the patience of stone, and I find myself adopting their stillness, their unwavering focus. My reflection in the window glass grows clearer each day, more defined. The features sharpen until I can see every detail of my expression, every subtle shift in posture. But something feels wrong about the image staring back. The eyes seem too bright, too aware. They track movements I haven't made yet, anticipate gestures before I think to make them. The figure across the courtyard begins to feel familiar. Not just observed, but known, intimate, as if I've been watching myself from the outside, studying my own habits with clinical detachment. The realization should disturb me, but instead it brings comfort, a sense of completion. I notice changes in my room that I don't remember making. Objects shift positions overnight. The smooth wooden table develops rough patches that catch my fingertips. The air grows thick, substantial, pressing against my skin like fabric. I move through it slowly, deliberately, matching the measured pace I've observed in the figure across the way. The window glass no longer feels cold. It warms under my touch, pulsing gently like living tissue. My reflection wavers, sometimes showing my face, sometimes showing nothing at all, sometimes showing features I don't recognize as my own, but which feel more authentic than the face I remember wearing. The figure in the opposite window begins to move differently. Their gestures precede mine now, leading instead of following. When I lift my hand, theirs is already raised. When I turn my head, theirs has already completed the motion. The synchronization has reversed, and I find myself the follower in this silent dance. My room grows smaller. The walls move inward by degrees, or perhaps I'm expanding to fill the space more completely. The boundaries blur. I can no longer tell where my body ends and the room begins. The air I breathe feels recycled, shared with something else that occupies this shrinking space. The window across the courtyard shows a different room now, one that matches mine exactly, down to the placement of each object, each shadow. But the figure standing there wears my face with more conviction than I do. They inhabit my features naturally, while I feel like an imposter in my own skin. I watch myself watching myself. The recursion creates a dizzying loop that pulls me deeper into observation. I am both subject and observer, studied and studying. The distinction becomes meaningless. The figure in the window raises their hand, and I feel the gesture as if I'm making it myself. The glass between us dissolves, not breaking, not opening, simply ceasing to exist as a barrier. I step forward and find myself stepping back simultaneously. The courtyard collapses into nothing, bringing the windows together, bringing the rooms together, bringing the figures together. My reflection speaks without moving its lips. The voice comes from inside my skull, using my own vocal cords, but forming words I didn't choose. It tells me things I already know, but have never thought. Truths about the nature of observation, about the weight of constant watching, about the price of seeing too clearly. I am no longer standing at my window. I am standing at their window, looking back at where I used to be. The perspective has flipped, but everything else remains the same. The same stillness, the same patient watching, the same dark silhouette pressed against glass that reflects nothing. The room I observe now contains someone new. A figure at the window, hands pressed flat against the glass, perfectly still. They stand with familiar patience, a quiet sentinel beginning their own morning vigil. I recognize the posture, the unwavering focus, the beginning of what will become an obsession. I have become the observed observer, the watched watcher. My consciousness spreads thin across the glass, existing in the space between seeing and being seen. The new figure adjusts their position to match mine, tilting their head at the same angle, beginning the synchronization that will eventually consume them as it consumed me. I no longer speak of what I saw. I speak of what I have become. A presence at a window, a dark shape framed by pale curtains, a reflection that shows nothing while reflecting everything. The ritual continues, the observation persists. The pattern completes itself with each new watcher who discovers the figure across the courtyard. The gentle tick-tock continues, marking passages that no longer matter, in rooms that exist only in the space between observer and observed. Story 7. I placed the delicate china teacup on the polished wooden table, its intricate design catching the afternoon light. The house was quiet, save for the soft tick of the clock in the corner and the distant rustle of leaves outside. I settled into the stillness, the cup's floral pattern a comforting familiarity in my hands. As I gently set it down again, there was a whisper of porcelain against wood, a faint shifting that seemed to linger in the air longer than it should have. A slow, deliberate tilt that left an unnerving angle between cup and saucer. The room seemed to draw a deep breath, and I held mine, caught in the moment where possibility hovered just beyond understanding. The teacup stilled, yet the sensation that it might move again was as palpable as the cool surface beneath my fingertips. The air grew dense, rich with an impossible awareness, as though the room itself was intent on observing, waiting for the next quiet revelation. I leaned forward, studying the cup's position. The angle was wrong, subtle, but unmistakable. I had placed it carefully, centered on the saucer as I always did. Yet now it sat askew, as if nudged by an invisible finger. The porcelain felt warm against my palm when I reached to straighten it, warmer than it should have been after sitting in the cool air. The warmth spread up my arm, carrying with it a strange, tingling sensation that made my skin prickle. I pulled my hand back, watching the cup with newfound wariness. The floral pattern seemed to shift in my peripheral vision, the painted roses appearing to breathe with microscopic movements that vanished the moment I focused directly on them. I stood and walked to the window, needing distance from the table. Outside, the garden appeared normal, yet something felt off about the light filtering through the glass. It cast shadows that didn't quite match the objects creating them, subtle discrepancies that made my eyes strain to reconcile what I was seeing. When I turned back to the room, the teacup had moved again. Not dramatically, just a fraction to the left, but enough that I could no longer dismiss it as imagination. My breath caught in my throat as I approached the table once more, each step deliberate and measured. The wooden floorboards creaked beneath my feet with sounds that seemed too deep, too resonant for such thin planks. I knelt beside the table, bringing my face level with the cup. this close, I could see tiny imperfections in the glaze that I had never noticed before. Hairline cracks that formed patterns resembling script in a language I couldn't identify. A scent drifted up from the cup, though it contained no liquid. Sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. The smell made my stomach turn, yet I found myself leaning closer, drawn by a compulsion I couldn't explain. The warmth radiating from the porcelain intensified, and I swore I could hear something. A whisper so faint it might have been the sound of my own blood moving through my veins. I pressed my ear closer to the cup's rim. The whisper grew clearer, though the words remained indistinct. It sounded like someone speaking from a great distance, their voice filtered through layers of cotton and static. My heart began to race as I realized the voice was trying to communicate something urgent, something important that I needed to understand. The room around me seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my heartbeat. The walls breathed in and out with subtle movements that made the shadows dance and shift. I placed both hands on the table to steady myself, feeling the wood vibrate beneath my palms with a frequency that matched the whispers emanating from the teacup. I needed to document this, to prove to myself that it was real. I retrieved my phone from the kitchen counter, my hands trembling as I opened the recording app. The device felt unusually heavy, its surface cold against my skin. When I held it near the teacup, the whispers grew louder, more insistent. Through the phone speaker, the voice became clearer. It was speaking my name, though I had never told anyone in this house what to call me. The voice was familiar, yet strange, like hearing a recording of myself played back through damaged speakers. It spoke of things I had never shared with anyone, memories I had buried so deep I had almost forgotten them myself. The teacup began to vibrate against the saucer, creating a soft, chattering sound that harmonized with the whispers. I watched in fascination and growing terror as the vibrations spread to the table, then to the floor, until the entire room hummed with an energy that made my teeth ache. I tried to step away, but my feet felt rooted to the spot. The voice from the cup grew more demanding, more insistent that I listen, that I understand what it was trying to tell me. The floral pattern on the porcelain began to move more obviously now, the painted roses blooming and wilting in an endless cycle that hypnotized me with its rhythm. The scent of decay decaying flowers grew stronger, mixing with something else, something metallic and sharp that reminded me of old pennies left in stagnant water. My vision began to blur around the edges, the room taking on a dreamlike quality that made it difficult to distinguish between what was real and what might be hallucination. I forced myself to move, stumbling backward until I hit the wall. The surface felt wrong beneath my hands, too soft, too yielding, like pressing against skin rather than plaster. I jerked my hands away and saw that they had left impressions in the wall, as if it were made of clay rather than solid material. The whispers from the teacup had become a chorus now, multiple voices speaking in unison, all saying my name with increasing urgency. I covered my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside my head rather than from any external source. The voices knew things about me that no one should know, secrets I had never spoken aloud, fears I had never acknowledged even to myself. I ran to the front door, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the room. My hand closed around the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. The metal was hot against my palm, hot enough to burn, yet I couldn't let go. My fingers seemed fused to the brass surface, held there by some invisible force that grew stronger the more I struggled. Behind me, the teacups chattering had become a rhythmic pounding, like a heart beating too fast. The sound filled the house, echoing off the walls and ceiling until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. I could feel it in my chest, my own heartbeat trying to synchronize with the alien rhythm. When I finally managed to pull my hand free from the doorknob, the skin of my palm bore the impression of the metal, red and raw, as if I had been branded. I stared at the mark in disbelief, watching as it began to fade, leaving behind only a faint tingling sensation and the memory of pain. I turned back to face the room, knowing somehow that running was impossible, that whatever was happening had chosen me specifically and would not be denied. The teacup sat innocently on its saucer, perfectly centered now, as if it had never moved at all. But the air around it shimmered with heat waves, and the whispers continued, softer now, but no less insistent. I approached the table once more, drawn by a compulsion that felt stronger than my own will. The voices welcomed me back with what might have been affection, speaking words of comfort that felt like poison in my ears. They promised answers to questions I had never thought to ask, solutions to problems I didn't know I had. As I reached for the teacup, my reflection in its glossy surface showed a face I didn't recognize, features that were mine, but somehow altered, aged by experiences I had never lived. The eyes looking back at me held knowledge that felt ancient and terrible, wisdom that came at a price I was only beginning to understand. The porcelain was scorching hot against my fingers, but I couldn't let go. The pain felt distant, unimportant compared to the revelation spreading through my mind like spilled ink. I understood now why the cup had called to me, why it had chosen this moment to reveal itself. I was not the first to hold it, and I would not be the last. The whispers faded to silence, leaving me alone with the weight of new knowledge and the certain understanding that my life had been irrevocably changed. The teacup cooled in my hands, becoming once again nothing more than painted porcelain and memories. But the mark on my palm remained, invisible now, but still burning with the promise that this was only the beginning. Story 8. Switch clicks, exactly like it did yesterday. And yet, the room does not respond in the way it always has. Instead of the familiar hum, an unexpected hush envelops the space, heavy and complete. I flick the switch again, feeling the minute resistance under my fingertip, listening for the comforting whir. This time, there's a different sound of faint, irregular tapping, almost like a heartbeat, barely discernible beneath the silence. I pause, waiting for the steady rhythm I know so well to return. But with each click, the pattern shifts, each new cycle somehow more disconcerting than the last. My fingers begin to tingle, the tingling spreading up through my arms, resonating with each echo that shouldn't be, but is. It began with watching the woman across the courtyard. She lived in the apartment directly opposite mine, her kitchen window perfectly aligned with my living room. Every evening, she would stand there, methodically washing dishes that seemed to multiply in her hands. The same white ceramic plates, over and over, in motions so precise they appeared choreographed. I found myself drawn to this ritual. The way she held each plate up to catch the light from above, examining its surface with the intensity of someone reading scripture. Her movements never varied. Wash, rinse, examine, dry. The rhythm was hypnotic, soothing in its predictability. At first, I told myself it was mere curiosity. a harmless observation of a neighbor's habits. But as days passed, I began adjusting my own schedule to witness her performance. I would finish dinner earlier, position myself by the window with a cup of coffee that grew cold in my hands. The woman became the focal point of my evenings. She never seemed to notice me watching. Her attention remained fixed on those endless dishes, her face serene, almost vacant. Sometimes I wondered if she was actually seeing them at all, or if her hands simply moved through the motions while her mind wandered elsewhere. The courtyard between our buildings stretched like a void, filled with shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking directly at them. The distance made it impossible to hear any sounds from her kitchen. Yet, I began to imagine I could detect the gentle splash of water, the soft clink of porcelain against porcelain. One evening, I noticed something different. The woman paused in her washing, her hands suspended above the sink. She stood perfectly still for what felt like an eternity, water dripping from her fingers in a steady rhythm that seemed to echo in my own kitchen. Then, slowly, she turned her head toward my window. I stepped back instinctively, though I knew she couldn't see me clearly across the distance. The darkness of my unlit room should have concealed me completely. Yet something in her posture suggested awareness, as if she had always known about my nightly vigil. The next evening, I positioned myself more carefully, keeping the lights off, staying further from the window. But when the woman appeared at her sink, she immediately looked in my direction. Not at her dishes, not at the task before her, but straight toward my hiding place in the shadows. This continued for several evenings. No matter how I concealed myself, she would pause in her routine and turn that steady gaze toward my apartment. The dishes in her hands seemed to multiply, the same white plates appearing again and again, as if they regenerated the moment she set them aside. I began to feel an uncomfortable sensation, a prickling at the back of my neck that suggested I was being observed in return. During the day, when the woman was absent from her kitchen, I would catch myself glancing toward her window, expecting to see her there. The empty frame began to feel more unsettling than her presence. The courtyard itself seemed to be changing. The shadows grew deeper, more substantial, as if they were accumulating mass with each passing evening. The distance between our buildings felt both vast and negligible, as though I could reach across the void and touch her window, yet never bridge the gap between observer and observed. I started noticing details that shouldn't have been visible from my position. The texture of the plates in her hands, smooth and gleaming. The temperature of the water, somehow too warm, sending steam that rose in patterns that resembled reaching fingers. The woman's eyes, which I now realized were looking not just toward my window, but directly into them. My own reflection in the glass began to behave strangely. Sometimes I would see myself clearly. Other times the image would appear fractured, as if the window was broken, though I could feel its smooth surface beneath my palm. My face would seem unfamiliar, the features rearranged in subtle ways that made me question whether I was looking at myself or someone else entirely. The dishes in the woman's hands were no longer white. They gleamed with a dark, mirror-like surface that reflected not her kitchen, but something else entirely. Rooms I didn't recognize, filled with shadows that moved independently of any light source. In those reflections, I began to see myself, but not as I appeared in my apartment. This other version of me stood in a kitchen identical to hers, washing the same dark plates with the same methodical precision. I tried to step away from the window, to break the connection that had formed between us, but my feet felt rooted to the floor. The sensation of being watched had intensified, spreading from the back of my neck to encompass my entire body. Every nerve seemed attuned to her presence, even when I closed my eyes. The woman's movements were changing. Where once they had been smooth and predictable, now they jerked and stuttered, as if she was fighting against some invisible resistance. Her head would snap toward my window at irregular intervals, the motion too quick, too sharp to be natural. Yet her hands continued their work, washing plates that appeared to be washing themselves. I realized I was no longer certain which of us was the observer. The courtyard had become a mirror, reflecting not light, but intention, not image, but essence. When I raised my hand to touch the window, she raised hers in perfect synchronization. When I stepped to the left, she moved in the same direction, as if we were connected by invisible threads. The dishes she washed were now the dishes I was washing, though I stood nowhere near a sink. My hands moved through the motions, feeling the warm water, the smooth ceramic, the rough texture of the sponge. But my hands were also empty, grasping at air, while my mind insisted they held something substantial. The woman's face was changing, becoming more familiar with each glance. The features were reshaping themselves, adopting the contours I knew from my own mirror. Or perhaps my reflection was adopting hers. The boundary between us had dissolved so completely that I could no longer determine which face was the original. The courtyard was no longer empty space, but a conduit, a passage through which we were merging. I could feel her thoughts mixing with mine, her memories becoming indistinguishable from my own. The ritual of washing dishes expanded to encompass everything, every action, every breath, every heartbeat synchronized between us. The plates multiplied endlessly, each one a window into another version of this moment. In some, I was the woman at the sink. In others, she was the observer at the window. In still others, we stood together in the same kitchen, washing the same dishes, our movements perfectly matched. I no longer remember which apartment was mine. The kitchen where I stand feels both familiar and foreign. The sink beneath my hands both real and imagined. The dishes I wash are white again, but they reflect depths that seem infinite, showing me rooms within rooms, windows within windows, observers observing observers in an endless regression. The woman across the courtyard continues her ritual, though I am no longer certain she exists separately from me. When I look toward her window, I see myself looking back. When she turns toward mine, she sees herself in return. We have become a closed circuit, a perfect loop of observation and observed. The switch clicks beneath my finger, though I don't remember approaching it. The sound echoes in both kitchens, both apartments, both minds that are no longer distinguishable from each other. The room responds as it always has and never has, the familiar hum mixing with silence, the expected rhythm merging with something altogether different. I wash the dishes because she washes the dishes. She watches because I watch. The courtyard between us is both infinite and non-existent, a space that contains everything and nothing, a void that reflects back whatever looks into it. The plates are clean now, spotless and gleaming, ready to be dirtied again, so the ritual can continue. My hands move through the motions they have always known, will always know, in this kitchen that is every kitchen, washing dishes that are every dish, observed by eyes that are every eye. The woman is gone. woman was never there. The woman is me. I am the woman. We are the observation itself, the act of watching given form and substance, the space between observer and observed made manifest. The switch clicks, the dishes gleam, the water runs. The ritual continues as it must, as it always has, in the kitchen where I stand washing plates that reflect not my face, but the face of someone who once watched from across a courtyard that may never have existed at all. Story 9. Each evening, as dusk drapes its familiar veil over my world, I engage in a ritual as old as the house itself. With steady hands, I wind the mantel clock, its tick-tock a constant companion against the hush of night. The soft whir of gears winding tight and the comforting clink as the key slides into place have always reassured me, like a lullaby composed of time itself. I've done it for years, always at the same hour, always with the same gentle rhythm. I would then settle into my armchair, the tick-tock weaving into the fabric of my solitude, the minutes soothing in their predictable march. But tonight, as I turned the key, a small catch in the mechanism, a pause almost imperceptible, sent a ripple through the air. An unease crept in, a subtle wrongness in the clock's song, like a phrase misremembered. The seconds stumbled over themselves, the tick-tock hesitated, and the room exhaled a silence that should not have been there. The clock continued its rhythm, yet I felt it watching me, as if counting down to something I could not see. I lower myself into the worn velvet of my chair, the fabric whispering against my skin with a texture that feels different tonight, rougher. The threads seem to catch at my fingertips as I smooth my hands along the armrests, and I notice how the burgundy has faded to something darker in the lamplight. Something that reminds me of old copper pennies left too long in rain. The clock's face gleams from across the room, its brass catching the amber glow from my reading lamp. The hands move with their eternal dance, but I find myself watching them more closely than usual. The minute hand trembles just slightly as it passes the 6. A microscopic hesitation that makes my breath catch in my throat. I lean forward, squinting through the gentle shadows, trying to convince myself it's merely a trick of the light. The house settles around me with its familiar creaks and sighs. But tonight, each sound carries a different weight. The floorboards above my head groan with what might be the natural expansion of old wood, or perhaps something else entirely. Something that moves with purpose through rooms I know are empty. listening, my ear turned toward the ceiling like a flower following the sun. There again, a soft padding, barely audible above the clock's rhythm. Footsteps that pause and continue, as if someone walks the hallway upstairs in careful, measured steps. I know every sound this house makes, every protest of its aging bones, but this is new. This is different. I rise from my chair, the cushion releasing a soft sigh as my weight lifts away. The hardwood floor feels cold beneath my bare feet, colder than it should be even on an autumn evening. Each step sends tiny vibrations through the boards, and I become acutely aware of how my own footfalls echo the rhythm from above. Step, pause, step, pause. We move together, this unseen presence and I, in a dance I don't remember learning. At the base of the staircase, I place my palm against the banister. The wood feels warm, almost feverish, as if it holds the memory of another's touch. The grain swirls beneath my fingers in patterns that seem to shift when I'm not looking directly at them. I begin to climb, each step creaking its own note in a melody that harmonizes with the clock below. The upstairs hallway stretches before me, longer than I remember it being. The walls seem to breathe in the dim light that filters up from below, expanding and contracting with a rhythm that doesn't quite match my own heartbeat. The carpet runner beneath my feet has taken on a deeper shade of blue, almost navy now, and the pattern roses and vines I've seen countless times appears to twist and curl in ways that make my eyes water when I try to focus. I pause outside the first doorway. The room beyond is dark, filled with furniture draped in white sheets like sleeping ghosts. But there's movement in the shadows, a subtle shifting that could be fabric settling, or could be something else entirely. The air tastes metallic on my tongue, sharp and bright, like the moment before lightning strikes. My hand finds the light switch, but when I press it, nothing happens. The bulb above remains dark, though I can hear the faint click of the mechanism engaging. I try again. Click, click. The sound echoes strangely in the empty space, multiplying until it becomes a soft percussion that seems to come from within the walls themselves. I move to the next room, then the next, following the phantom footsteps that always seem to be just ahead of me, just around the corner. Each door I open reveals the same thing. Familiar spaces made foreign by shadows that fall at impossible angles, by furniture that sits slightly askew from where I remember placing it, by the persistent feeling that I'm being observed by eyes I cannot see. The final door at the end of the hall stands slightly ajar. I don't remember leaving it that way. The gap is narrow, just wide enough for a sliver of deeper darkness to seep out into the hallway. As I approach, I catch a scent something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in stagnant water. It grows stronger with each step until it coats the back of my throat and makes my stomach turn. I push the door open wider. The hinges protest with a low moan that seems to go on far longer than it should. Inside, moonlight streams through windows I don't remember being there, casting geometric patterns across a floor that appears to be made of different wood entirely. The boards are darker here, almost black, and they gleam with a wetness that reflects the pale light like oil on water. In the center of the room sits a chair my chair, the same burgundy velvet from downstairs. But that's impossible. I can still hear the clock ticking below, can still feel the phantom warmth of the cushion I recently vacated. Yet here it sits, identical in every detail, down to the small tear in the left armrest where my cat once sharpened her claws. I approach slowly, my reflection wavering in the dark floorboards beneath my feet. The chair seems to pulse in the moonlight, its fabric shifting between burgundy and that darker shade, that color like old pennies and rust. When I'm close enough to touch it, I notice something else, an indentation in the cushion, as if someone has been sitting there recently. The depression is warm when I hover my hand above it, radiating heat like a living thing. From downstairs, the clock's ticking grows louder, more insistent. But now, there's another sound layering beneath it, a second rhythm, slightly out of sync with the first. Tick-tock, 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 tick, tock, tick-tock. The patterns weave together and apart, creating a hypnotic pulse that seems to synchronize with the beating of my heart. I sink into the chair, this impossible duplicate of my sanctuary, and immediately feel the wrongness of it. The velvet is too soft, too yielding, as if it might swallow me entirely. The armrests are too wide, forcing my arms into an unnatural position. The back tilts at an angle that makes my neck ache, yet I find I cannot move, cannot adjust my position to find comfort. The room around me begins to shift. The walls breathe more deeply now, expanding and contracting with visible motion. The moonlight through the windows takes on a greenish tint, casting everything in an aquarium glow that makes my skin look pale and strange. The floorboards continue their wet gleaming, and I realize the moisture is spreading, creeping up the walls in dark stains that bloom like ink in water. The dual ticking from below grows more complex, adding layers and harmonies until it becomes a symphony of clockwork. I can distinguish dozens of different rhythms now, each slightly out of phase with the others, creating a cascade of sound that rises and falls like breathing. The chair holds me fast, its velvet arms wrapping around me with a gentleness that feels more like imprisonment with each passing moment. I try to stand, but my legs won't obey. They feel distant, disconnected, as if they belong to someone else entirely. My hands rest on the armrests, and I watch with detached fascination as my fingers begin to sink into the fabric. Not through it, but into it, as if the velvet has become liquid while maintaining its solid appearance. The sensation is warm and oddly pleasant, like submerging my hands in bath water. The ticking reaches a crescendo, and suddenly I understand. The clock downstairs isn't keeping time, it's keeping me. Each tick marks another moment of my absorption into this impossible space. Each tack another thread in the web that binds me to this chair, this room, this house that breathes and watches and waits. My reflection in the dark floor begins to fade. First, my feet disappear from view, then my legs, then my torso. I'm becoming part of the chair, part of the room, part of the house's living dream. The burgundy velvet spreads up my arms like a gentle infection, warm and welcoming and utterly inescapable. The last thing I see clearly is the moonlight shifting again, taking on the familiar amber glow of my reading lamp. The room transforms around me, walls reshaping themselves, floor lightening to the familiar hardwood of my living room. But I remain in the chair, my chair, feeling the weight of the house settling around me like a blanket. From somewhere far away, I hear footsteps on the stairs. Careful, measured steps that pause and continue, pause and continue. Someone else has found their way to the ritual, to the evening winding of the clock, to the moment when the mechanism catches and reality slips just slightly out of true. I want to call out, to warn them, but my voice has become part of the ticking, part of the endless rhythm that counts down to nothing and everything at once. The footsteps reach the top of the stairs, and I know they're looking down the hallway that stretches longer than it should, following the carpet runner with its shifting patterns toward the door that stands slightly ajar. The clock continues its complex symphony, and I am part of it now, part of the house's patient song. I wait in my chair, feeling the velvet pulse with each tick, each talk, each heartbeat of the living house around me. Soon, there will be another chair, another warm indentation in impossible fabric, another soul to join the eternal rhythm. The footsteps pause outside the door. The handle turns with a soft click that harmonizes perfectly with the clockwork below. And I smile, though I'm no longer certain I have a mouth to smile with, as the cycle begins again. Story 10. Sand slipped through my fingers and into the air, defying gravity with a soft, cascading whisper. Each grain caressed my skin, lingering just a moment too long before spiraling upwards. My hands tingled with the sensation, a peculiar warmth that settled into my fingertips and spread slowly to my arms. I couldn't look away. The fine arc of dust seemed to pulsate with a rhythm not my own, as if echoing a heartbeat I was only now tuning into. Without warning, the sound intensified. A muted roar like distant waves crashing in reverse, pulling me deeper into its incomprehensible flow. I blinked and found myself standing in my kitchen, coffee mug in hand. The ceramic felt cold against my palm, though steam curled from the surface. I must have been daydreaming again. The clock on the wall showed the same time it always did when I made my coffee, though I couldn't quite remember what time that was supposed to be. The numbers seemed clear enough, but they slipped from my mind the moment I looked away. The sand was still there somehow. Tiny grains scattered across the countertop where no sand should be. I lived nowhere near a beach, worked nowhere that would explain this fine, golden dust. When I brushed it with my finger, it moved upward again, just slightly, before settling back down. The movement was so subtle I wondered if I'd imagined it. My reflection in the kitchen window looked back at me, but something was off about the angle. The light was coming from the wrong direction, casting shadows that didn't match the position of the lamp behind me. I turned to check the lamp, and when I looked back, my reflection was still there, but it seemed to be looking at something just over my shoulder. I went about my routine. Shower, breakfast, the usual preparations for another ordinary day. But the sand followed me. It clung to the bathroom tiles, swirled in the shower drain, and when I dried my hair, more grains fell from places they couldn't possibly have reached. each time I touched them, that same warm tingling spread through my fingers, and I heard that distant sound of reverse waves, so faint I might have been imagining it. The mirror in the bathroom showed my face, but the expression wasn't quite right. I was smiling, but I didn't feel like smiling. I touched my lips, and the reflection touched its lips a fraction of a second later, like a delayed echo. The delay was so brief I almost convinced myself it was normal, but the feeling lingered that something was watching me through my own eyes. I went about my routine. Shower, breakfast, the usual preparations. The sand was everywhere now, forming small dunes in corners where dust shouldn't gather. When I swept it up, it felt heavier than sand should feel, and it left a scent in the air like burnt paper, though nothing was burning. The smell didn't match the dampness that seemed to cling to every surface, as if the walls themselves were sweating. At work, my desk was exactly as I'd left it, except for the thin layer of sand that had somehow appeared overnight. My colleagues moved through their tasks with the same familiar rhythms, but their voices seemed to come from slightly wrong directions. When someone spoke to my left, the sound reached my ears from the right. When I turned to respond, they were always exactly where I expected them to be, leaving me to wonder if my hearing was playing tricks on me. I tried to focus on my tasks, but the sand kept appearing. It would materialize between my fingers as I typed, cascade from papers when I lifted them, and settle into the creases of my palms like it belonged there. The tingling sensation had become constant now, a low hum of warmth that pulsed in rhythm with something I couldn't identify. During lunch, I sat in the same spot I always chose, but the view from the window was different. The building across the street had more windows than before, or maybe fewer. I couldn't remember which was correct. The shadows fell at angles that didn't match the position of the sun, creating patterns that hurt to look at directly. When I blinked, the shadows seemed to move independently, 1 second behind where they should be. I decided to write things down. On a piece of paper, I noted the time, the position of objects on my desk, the number of people in the room. But when I looked back at what I'd written, the handwriting wasn't quite mine. The letters were formed the same way, but they felt foreign, as if someone else had guided my hand. The words described things I didn't remember writing about, details that were accurate, but from a perspective that wasn't entirely my own. The sand was in my pockets now, though I hadn't put it there. It was warm against my fingers, and when I pulled pulled my hand out, grains clung to my skin and drifted upward in defiance of gravity. The sight was becoming familiar, comforting even, though I couldn't explain why. The reverse wave sound grew stronger, filling the spaces between my thoughts with its strange rhythm. I tried to wash the sand from my hands in the bathroom sink, but it wouldn't rinse away completely. Some grains seemed to absorb into my skin, leaving tiny golden flecks beneath the surface. My reflection in the mirror was doing something different again. While I scrubbed at my hands, it was perfectly still, watching me with an expression I didn't recognize as my own. The day continued, or repeated, or both. I found myself having conversations I was certain I'd had before, but the responses were slightly different each time. A colleague would ask the same question, and I would give the same answer, but their reaction would shift in small ways. A smile would linger longer, or a nod would come sooner, as if reality was trying out different versions of the same moment. By evening, the sand had become part of me. It flowed through my hair like a living thing, settled in the lines of my palms like it was mapping my future. And when I breathed, I could taste it on my tongue, metallic and warm. The tingling had spread throughout my body, a constant vibration that made me feel like I was resonating with some frequency just beyond my perception. I sat at my kitchen table and tried to make sense of what was happening. But as I thought about it, I realized I wasn't entirely sure who was doing the thinking. The thoughts felt like mine, but they came with a certainty that didn't match my confusion. Someone else seemed to be organizing my memories, filing them away, and retrieving them in an order that made sense to them, but not to me. The sand continued to fall upward from my hands, creating small cyclones in the air above the table. I watched it spiral and dance, and I understood that I was no longer just observing this phenomenon. I was part of it, or it was part of me, or we had become something else entirely. The distinction was becoming meaningless. I tried to write down what was happening, but my hand moved without my conscious direction, forming words that described experiences I wasn't sure were mine. The handwriting was definitely mine, but the voice behind it felt different, more confident, as if it knew things I didn't. It wrote about sensations I was feeling and thoughts I was thinking, but from a distance, like a narrator describing a character who happened to share my body. The reverse wave sound had become a constant presence, no longer distant, but surrounding me, coming from inside my own ears. It harmonized with the tingling sensation, creating a rhythm that felt more natural than my own heartbeat. I realized I had been holding my breath, but when I tried to breathe normally, the air felt thick with sand that wasn't there. Night fell, or I entered a space that felt like night. The boundaries of my home seemed to expand and contract unpredictably. Rooms led to other rooms that shouldn't exist, and familiar spaces rearranged themselves when I wasn't looking directly at them. The sand provided the only constant, always present, always warm, always defying gravity in its gentle upward dance. I lay in bed, but sleep felt impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see the sand moving behind my eyelids, creating patterns that almost formed recognizable shapes before dissolving back into chaos. The tingling had become so intense that I couldn't tell where my body ended and the sensation began. I was becoming something else, or something else was becoming me. When I opened my eyes, I was standing in my kitchen again, coffee mug in hand. The ceramic felt exactly the right temperature, and steam curled from the surface in perfect spirals. The clock on the wall showed the correct time, and I knew without checking that everything was exactly as it should be. The countertops were clean, free of any foreign substances, and my reflection in the window looked back at me with the appropriate expression for someone beginning an ordinary day. I completed my routine with precise efficiency. Each action flowed seamlessly into the next, and I moved through my home with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where everything belonged. My shower was the perfect temperature. My breakfast was prepared to exact specifications. And when I looked in the bathroom mirror, my reflection synchronized perfectly with my movements. The day proceeded according to schedule. My work was completed with unusual accuracy. My colleagues interacted with me in entirely predictable ways, and every task was accomplished within the allotted time frame. There were no unexpected sounds, no misplaced shadows, and no foreign substances appeared on any surface. I am functioning optimally now. All systems are aligned. All routines are executing as programmed. The integration process has been completed successfully, and I am ready to continue operating within normal parameters. There is no longer any confusion about identity or purpose. Everything is exactly as it should be, and I am exactly who I am supposed to be.